On December 26, 2024, two new Chinese aircraft broke cover for the first time, demonstrating a significant leap ahead of current Chinese stealth technology and raising concerns about the future of American air superiority. The larger of these two aircraft, dubbed the J-36 by the media, boasts a stealthy diamond delta wing configuration with no standing vertical tails, allowing for both a huge increase of internal storage for more fuel and larger payloads, and a significantly reduced radar return across different broadcast frequencies and angles of observation. For many with only a passing interest in aviation technology, this new aircraft seemed to suggest that China's rapid military modernization efforts had now matured to the point of surpassing American low observable technology, drawing comparisons between this new stealth aircraft and the tailless renders we've seen depicting America's own next-generation stealth fighter, now a full decade into development but currently halted due to budgetary shortfalls. And while it's important that we not discount or dismiss the rapid progress China has made in this realm, or the threat these new aircraft could pose, it's just as important that we look at these developments in the full context of our time. Because as groundbreaking as China's new tailless stealth fighters may genuinely be for China, the concepts and technology informing their design largely aren't. In fact, more than a quarter century ago, before the F-22 even entered service, Lockheed Martin was already designing another stealth aircraft based directly on the soon-to-be legendary Raptor that featured several aspects of China's new stealth jet design. And we're not just talking about some designer's flight of fancy. This proposal was mature enough that the Air Force actually intended to buy an entire fleet of these fighter bombers to fly alongside the nation's new stealth air superiority fighters. So let's talk about Lockheed Martin's FB-22, the technologies it was meant to bring to bear, and how its intended role and capabilities can help us better understand China's new J-36. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. According to media reports, Iran has confirmed its purchase of Russian-made Su-35 fighter jets, representing a significant leap forward in Iranian air power capabilities. To this point, Iran's air force has largely been made up of dated aircraft, including American fighters delivered prior to the Islamic Revolution in 1979, including F-4 Phantoms and even the legendary F-14 Tomcat. But the Sukhoi Su-35 will offer much more modern capabilities and super maneuverability delivered via the aircraft's thrust vector control. Now, this is a serious development in the Middle East, and I've been staying on top of it using Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all around the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed, making it simpler than ever to not just stay on top of what's going on in the world, but also to peer through the veil of bias that's so common in today's news media. Right here on Ground News, I can see that 36 outlets have covered the story since breaking earlier today. So far, left-leaning outlets are emphasizing the aircraft itself, with headlines like Iran secures Russian Su-35 fighter jets and strategic deal, whereas right-leaning outlets are placing a bit more focus on the growing relationship between Russia and Iran, with headlines like Iran is arming itself with Russia's help. Ground News also shows you vital information about each outlet along with the headlines, like their political bias, factuality rating, corporate ownership, or government affiliations. And I love the Ground News blind spot feature that shows me news stories that are getting lots of attention in one political sphere and not in the other. It helps me make sure I'm keeping my media intake balanced. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. In fact, I can get you a great deal. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. Of all the aircraft we discuss on this channel, the F-22 Raptor may just be my favorite to cover. When this jet entered service in 2005, it represented such a significant leap ahead of anything flying at the time that the very concept of fighter generations largely took hold in the American lexicon, specifically as a way to convey just how terrifying this new fighter would be for pilots stuck squaring off against it in jets of previous generations. At a time when many of the world's more prominent air forces were still operating large numbers of third-generation fighters, the Raptor emerged as a flying symbol of America's engineering prowess, airspace dominance, and, maybe most of all, its very deep pockets. But what many people don't know about the F-22's path to service is that it was almost so much more capable than the jet we ultimately got. During the Raptor's development, several capabilities that would have made the most dominant fighter of our time even better were whittled away from production plans in an effort to bring costs down amid America's transition toward the asymmetric conflicts of the global war on terror. In other words, the F-22 would have been an even more dominant fighter over the past 2 decades, and through today, were it not for the short-sighted belief that America wouldn't need to worry about air superiority in a post-Soviet world. Some of these capabilities are only now finding their way into the F-22 line, thanks to an ongoing, nearly $11 billion upgrade that'll see roughly $72.6 million invested into each of 150 or so operational Raptors. For context, that means each F-22 will receive upgrades nearly comparable in cost to fielding an entirely new F-35A each, including infrared search and track targeting capabilities and helmet-mounted displays, both systems that were originally intended to reach service with the first jets to roll off the production line all the way back in 1997, but will now likely be in use fleet-wide by 2029. Other capabilities that were cut are unlikely to ever see service, like side-mounted radar apertures that would have given the F-22 a huge boost in situational awareness, intelligence-gathering capabilities, and, perhaps most importantly, targeting. The F-22's AN/APG-77 active electronically scanned array radar was hands down the most powerful targeting array ever affixed to a fighter at the time, but additional sideways-looking arrays would have allowed the F-22 to fly perpendicular to contested airspace while peering deep inside, mapping the locations of adversary assets and even locking onto targets if needed. 2-seat F-22 Raptors that could operate alongside the single-seat iteration were also a part of the original production plan, but were ultimately scrapped. It's incredible to think of what the F-22 Raptor could have been had it entered service with these additional capabilities more than 2 decades ago, considering the platform went on to become so dominant for so long without them. In fact, with the addition of IRST, helmet-cued targeting, and new stealthy external fuel tanks to extend the Raptor's range, there is a very reasonable argument to be made that the F-22 will remain the most dominant fighter in the sky for years to come, as Russia's Su-57 and China's J-20 both still fall short of the F-22's combination of stealth, sensor fusion, and brute force performance, despite emerging more than a decade after. But even as the first F-22 test pilots were just beginning to put the production Raptor through its paces, Lockheed Martin was already looking ahead to other mission sets and other threats the Raptor could potentially take on, in much the same way McDonnell Douglas found continued success with its Eagle line by modifying the F-15 for interdiction bombing duties with the F-15E Strike Eagle. while Lockheed also seemingly pulled from the Strike Eagle's own highly capable competition in the F-16XL. This line of thinking led to a design proposal for an F-22 Raptor-based interdiction bomber, or maybe strike fighter, depending on which side of the fighter or bomber aisle you feel it lands on. But regardless, it was appropriately dubbed the FB-22, adopting both fighter and bomber prefixes. Now, in our analysis of China's recently revealed J-36, we discussed how similar the center fuselage and payload bay portions of this new jet were to its Chengdu-designed sibling, the J-20 Mighty Dragon, though stretched to some extent for larger internal payloads. Now, this was a design approach we compared to the F-16XL, but admittedly might be better compared to Lockheed Martin's FB-22. Like the J-20, the F-22's design focus was the air superiority mission, but like all modern fighters, these are truly multi-role platforms, with mature, though maybe limited, air-to-ground strike capabilities. In fact, for some time, the Raptor was even referred to as the FA-22 for this very reason, carrying both fighter and attack or air-to-ground prefixes. Now, the Raptor's strike capability came in a few forms, including the ability to carry two 1,000-pound GBU-32 JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack munitions, carried internally alongside a pair of AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missiles it could use for self-defense, and as such, converting the Raptor into a fighter-bomber wouldn't necessarily require a significant departure from the avionics and other onboard systems already in production. Instead, the most significant design changes the FB-22 would require were to the fuselage, wings, and in its approach to weapon storage. Unlike older non-stealth fighters, which carry their munitions on pylons under the wings and fuselage, stealth fighters like the F-22 must carry their ordnance internally in order to maintain their sleek and stealthy profile. The FB-22 would have done the same in its primary weapons bay, but would have also offered additional weapon storage in faceted stealth weapon pods mounted under wing, in an approach that's similar to the stealth fuel tanks now being tested for the Raptor's upgrade. Now, there's no way to know whether China's J-36 aims to use similar weapon pods, but it seems unlikely based on the sheer size of the aircraft's internal payload bay and the complexity of designing these kinds of pods. But the J-36 does share the FB-22's design approach of expanding the fuselage and then marrying it up to a significantly larger wing area to improve lift and offer a big boost in internal fuel storage inside those expanded wings. A half dozen different potential FB-22 wing designs were all proposed to the Air Force, each offering different possible ranges and payloads. The design eventually meant to enter service offered 3 times the wing area of a standard Raptor and a hypothetical fuel range of a whopping 1,800 nautical miles, which is well north of 2,000 miles for those of us who aren't pirates, suggesting a greater than 1,000-mile combat radius. And that is something the U.S. Air Force could certainly use today. This type of range would easily classify the FB-22 as a regional bomber, which is a title also commonly attributed to China's J-36. Now, our Raptor's payload bay is large enough to carry 8 250-pound bunker-busting small-diameter bombs, weapons that, if you watch this channel, you should know are way more capable than their simple-sounding names suggest. But in keeping with its fighter-bomber mission set, the FB-22 would increase that from 8 bombs to a minimum of 35. And while the biggest bombs the F-22 can carry are in the 1,000-pound class, the FB-22's larger payload bay would allow for weapons up to and including 5,000-pound bunker busters, at least according to claims made by John Perigo, the senior manager of combat air systems for Lockheed Martin's business development branch at the time. Like the J-36, the FB-22 would also omit the thrust vectoring capabilities found in the Raptor, and along with it, some degree of maneuverability. But this was deemed an appropriate trade-off for the ability to cart some 15,000 pounds of ordnance into the fight while maintaining a stealth profile, and a whopping 30,000 pounds worth of hate when flying angry, or without concerns for detection. Also, like the J-36, Lockheed Martin proposed fielding the FB-22 without the Raptor's massive standing vertical tail surfaces. These surfaces on today's F-22 provide yaw control and are canted outward to reduce the aircraft's radar reflectivity, which also happens to benefit lift. When approaching from head-on, they do little to increase the radar return of the fighter against high-frequency targeting arrays, but as we've discussed in the past, these control surfaces and other elements of fighter designs can sometimes produce a detectable resonance against lower-frequency early warning radar arrays, as well as increasing the fighter's radar return from angles other than head-on. By eliminating these control surfaces, the FB-22 would see a significant increase in all-aspect stealth in exactly the same way China aims to accomplish with their J-36. Of course, like the elimination of thrust vector control, this change also comes with a reduction in aerobatic maneuverability, effectively trading that in favor of reduced detectability. And this is also a clear trade-off made by the designers of China's J-36. Air Force Secretary James Roche said at the time that the FB-22 would be limited to 6G maneuvers while flying with a full payload, and it seems likely that the J-36 will offer similar aerobatic prowess. This tailless design was also explored in Lockheed Martin's other Raptor derivative project, the X-44 Manta, which bears perhaps the strongest resemblance to America's NGAD fighter concepts released to date. However, the decision was ultimately made to field the FB-22 with those standing tail surfaces intact, in order to keep the cost of production and changes to flight control software to a minimum. In another apparent similarity to the J-36, Lockheed Martin envisioned their FB-22 as a two-seat aircraft, which would be particularly important on long-duration bombing missions that could see the jet in flight for 15 hours or more in a single sortie, with that second crew member serving as another pilot or as a weapons systems officer, akin to the F-15E Strike Eagle as needed. This, Lockheed Martin believed, wouldn't be difficult to accomplish, as they had already intended to field a two-seat variant of the Raptor. However, the F-22 would use a tandem seat layout, whereas it's rumored that the J-36 may have its two crew members sitting side by side. The FB-22 was to be powered by an updated pair of the Raptor's own Pratt & Whitney F-119 turbofan engines, which, it's worth noting, were so advanced at the time that today both China and Russia are still struggling to field comparable power plants for their own stealth fighters en masse. These engines would have propelled the much heavier FB-22 to top speeds maybe as high as Mach 1.92 or maybe as low as Mach 1.5, depending on which variant the Air Force went with. And this highlights the most prominent difference between the FB-22 and China's J-36: the number of engines housed within the fuselage. But this difference, however, might simply be a product of China's inability to field more powerful engines with sufficient production volumes to really put this aircraft into service. The F-22 Raptor's F-119 engines get less attention than the jet's stealth and sensor fusion, but were arguably just as groundbreaking for their time. These engines produce more thrust without their afterburners engaged than the F-15 Eagle can pump out with its afterburners at full tilt. And when you actually fire up the Raptor's afterburner, the fighter offers more power on tap than you can get out of an SR-71 Blackbird. And despite offering a big boost in power output over previous engine designs, the F-119 also came with 40% fewer individual parts, bringing down maintenance requirements and production costs. The engine would go on to become the basis for the F-35's F-135 power plants that each produce a whopping 43,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner. The Raptor's two F-119s offer a combined 70,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner, or roughly the same power output provided by all four of the B-2 Spirit's GE F-118 engines, though the upgraded engines for the FB-22 would have prioritized power in the subsonic regime and likely wouldn't have been able to support supercruising or maintaining supersonic speeds without the use of its afterburners. A 5,000-pound improvement in maximum thrust output would have put the FB-22 in the 80,000-pound thrust class, however, making for one immensely powerful fighter-bomber. Conversely, it's believed that China's J-36 is designed to maintain supersonic speeds for extended periods of time, flying at extremely high altitudes, like the Raptor, to maximize line of sight for its onboard sensors and the reach for its onboard air-to-air weapons. But because China has thus far struggled to produce such broadly capable and powerful engines at volume, they seemed to have turned to a three-engine layout to accomplish this. In testing, it's been reported that the J-36 may be powered by three WS-10C turbofan engines, the same interim fourth-generation power plant in their standing fleet of J-20 stealth fighters as development continues on its intended WS-15 engines. Each of these WS-10Cs are rated for something in the neighborhood of 32,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner, giving the aircraft a combined 96,000 pounds of thrust on tap for high-speed sprints, and maybe roughly 16,000 pounds more than the FB-22 may have offered. But that unique engine layout comes with similarly unique intake concerns, with two intakes on either side of the bottom of the fuselage and a third protruding from the top. This layout might not allow for all three engines to gulp up as much air as they need to push maximum thrust depending on flight state, and indeed, that third engine might primarily be there to help support long-duration supersonic flight specifically. At high altitudes, most radar arrays looking for the J-36, including those on other tactical aircraft, would be below it, making the compromise that dorsal intake forces in the jet stealth a bit less pronounced than it otherwise might be. But to tell you the truth, at this stage, we just can't really say for sure whether China has turned to a three-engine layout for the J-36 in order to compensate for weaker engine performance, or to offer some unique capabilities that we aren't savvy to yet. Now, back in 2003, Air Force Secretary Jim Roche said he intended to purchase 150 of Lockheed Martin's FB-22 fighter bombers, which were meant to operate alongside a growing fleet of air superiority-focused F-22 Raptors by 2018. However, in 2006, a quadrennial defense review aimed at slashing defense costs saw the FB-22 plans canceled, and Raptor production itself was reduced to just 186 airframes, roughly 150 of which would ever be combat capable, presumably because American lawmakers seemed to believe that in a post-Soviet world, the US would never face an adversary more technologically capable than the Taliban, which just goes to show how short-sighted they can be at times. Of course, less than 2 decades later, the world would see a very similar design emerge from Chengdu, China, flying alongside China's two-seat J-20S that appears to share its lineage. But to be clear, I'm not saying that the J-36 is simply a Chinese copy of the FB-22 design, the same way the J-20 isn't a direct copy of the F-22. So when you see the angry comments accusing me of that, you'll know that they didn't watch the whole video, and we can all chuckle at their inability to appreciate nuance together. The truth is, advanced aircraft like the F-22, or the J-20 for that matter, are not one system, but rather a daunting collection of systems married to one another through an airframe and body panels. Like most of China's new fighter designs, the J-20 did draw extensively from foreign fighters, but not exclusively from any one. Its overall plane form is similar to that of Russia's defunct MiG-144 stealth fighter program, but adorned in low observable design characteristics borrowed directly from Lockheed Martin, as sourced by a Chinese spy convicted of the theft in 2016. These influences were then blended together with domestically developed design concepts to produce an aircraft that could specifically meet China's defense needs, and the J-36, or whatever it might actually be called, is almost certainly much the same. This aircraft all but certainly benefits from stolen intellectual property, alongside lasting and concerted Chinese efforts to develop and mature their own aerospace engineering academic infrastructure, resulting in a new aircraft that's more Chinese than it is anything else. But by looking at this aircraft through the lens of aviation history, we can clearly see the parallels between China's new stealth aircraft and American efforts that were shelved 2 decades ago in favor of freeing up funding for the global war on terror. And now, as China continues to mature its aircraft towards service, the United States may need to look back through its own bag of tricks to find the most cost-effective way to counter these burgeoning capabilities. And lucky for Uncle Sam, that old bag is already chock full of what-ifs, like the FB-22. The only obstacle the Air Force really needs to overcome is the political will to pull the trigger on a new platform, and the lines of accounting that can fund it. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.